Our next plenary speaker is considered as Edinburgh Indiana Jones of Botany. He authored 131 new species and varieties of plants, particularly in the family of Ericaceae, Campanulaceae, Convolvulaceae, and Musaceae, and named 2 sections under subgenus Rhododendron. He has authored 5 books on the taxonomy and cultivation of rhododendrons. 6 species of plants have also been named after him. In 2015, he published the 2nd edition of Virea Rhododendron book with over 300 species described and keyed, many of which are illustrated. Our next plenary speaker is completing accounts of Vaccinium, approximately 40 species, of Borneo. He has well advanced accounts of Vaccinium and Diplicosia for the Philippines, and during the same year, he represented a keynote address on Ericaceae of the Philippines in Manila sometime in 2015. Our plenary speaker has been conferred very prestigious awards in the UK and in the US, such as the Honorary Fellow of the University of Edinburgh, Royal Horticultural Society Lauder Cup, American Rhododendron Society 2002 Gold Medal Award, and the 2013 David Fairchild Medal for Plant Exploration. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow naturalists, our plenary speaker, the Edinburgh Indiana Jones of Botany, Dr. Graham Charles George Argent.
Well, thank you very much for that embarrassing introduction. And thank you very much for the organisers inviting me to the conference. It's always lovely to be back in the Philippines. I enjoy the country very much. And I'm very grateful for the hospitality of the CLADES organisers and the sponsors of this conference. Now, I didn't much like the title that I was given to speak about, because in no way do I wish to say to try and tell you what you should be doing with your specimens. It's entirely up to you. So what I'd rather do is to tell you something of what we do with our specimens. And if you like the ideas, well, I'm very happy if you accommodate them, but by no means feel that I'm telling you or trying to tell you what to do. Now, why should I be speaking here at all, really? The introduction really is fairly irrelevant, I think, to museums' collections. But I have been collecting specimens for over 50 years now, botanical specimens, been making herbarium specimens, some better, some worse. And I was curator of the Edinburgh Herbarium just fairly recently before I retired. But in actual fact, I've been retired now 12 years, and herbarium curation has changed absolutely immeasurably in the last 12 years since I've been retired. So in a way, I've run round to other people and been asking them to help me with this presentation because I really don't feel as up to date as I should be. Now, the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, is an ancient institution. We're the 6th oldest botanic garden in the world. We've been going about nearly 350 years, and the herbarium has been established nearly 200 years now. And it's quite interesting that the herbarium was first established by a botanical society, basically of amateurs that were put together that were interested in plants. It was taken over by the university and eventually taken over by the government, and it's now very much a government-sponsored institution for which we're very lucky with our funding. Now this is the Palm House, and I always like to show this because it's the tallest palm house in Britain, by no means now in the world. But when Kew built their palm house, we had to build a palm house. We couldn't afford to build a bigger one, but we built a taller one. It's about 15 centimetres taller than the Kew one. Now, how do we get this to move forward? I'm moving the wrong way. Just for those who are unfamiliar where Scotland is, we're part of the United Kingdom, sitting quite a long way from the Philippines and quite a long way north. A lot of people don't appreciate that we're virtually on the same latitude as Moscow and southern Alaska. But due to the warm Gulf Stream that comes across the Atlantic, we have a relatively mild oceanic climate. Edinburgh, the red spot, is on the eastern side. We're rather dry, but nevertheless we have a temperate climate. Now, what we call our new herbarium building, which was opened in 1964, so it's not so new now. I was very interested to see this wonderful new building that you're having opened in Manila with all sorts of architectural things, because the architects always like a beautiful building, and we like to think that this is quite an attractive building to house specimens in, but it doesn't always match up with the architect's view, and we've had to modify things. That is a big south-facing glass place. Now, ideally specimens should be kept at an even temperature. We try to keep them at around about 21 degrees centigrade and relatively even humidity, between 40 and 50%. The humidity is relatively easy to control in Britain. I imagine it's much less easy to control in the tropics here. But the sun beating on that side of the herbarium building has always meant that we've had terrible arguments about it being too hot on one side of the building and too cold on the other. And it was quite interesting that the architects never thought either that when they put in thermostats, that one of the thermostats would sit right where one of the scientists boiled his specimens up with a hot plate underneath, which consequently meant that everybody in the building froze. Now, we're a fairly conventional herbarium. This is for use in things, steel cabinets with rubber seals, which help to prevent pests moving around, more of which I'll come to later. You can see the red edges of the type specimens in folders, and we do the usual things. We try and make sure that people always write their labels with archival ink, that they're mounted on acid-free paper, which is thick, it's not flimsy paper, it's card, which supports the specimens. And we file them away now. We rather boast that we're the biggest herbarium to have adopted the APG system. Now, of course, a herbarium is really just a filing system, and it really doesn't matter whether you follow an alphabetical system, the old Benjamin Hooker system, or, as we do now, the APG system of families. What is important is that people can go and find the specimens, and as I say, that it works as an information retrieval system. People have very strong and differing views about it. I'm fairly neutral. As I say, I feel the important thing is that one in a herbarium can go and find a particular specimen if one wants to. When specimens come in, they go through a sort procedure before they're mounted. We look at things while they're still loose in folds of newspaper. This is much easier usually, and we can select bits to put in packets. Now, with DNA procedures, and it's one of the things, as I say, even 10 years ago, people were saying, oh, you can't get DNA out of herbarium specimens. Now it's absolutely amazing what people can get DNA information out of herbarium material. I was at a conference only 2 months ago, which we held in Edinburgh, about molecular work, and I was truly astonished now at what people can get good DNA information from all sorts of specimens, and some of them extinct. So having the initial sort, retrieving pieces which were put into packets so that people who want DNA material, hopefully asking for it properly from their curators, but nevertheless they don't have to prize bits off glued down herbarium specimens. This is our mounting room, and excuse me, as I said, we now mount with archival glue on thickish card, and the specimens are all double folded. Originally we only double folded type specimens, now all the specimens are double folded. A lot of old-fashioned taxonomists like myself don't really like this because it involves a lot more work in investigating the specimens. The gluing is also something, fortunately, we put instructions on before we send things for mounting, because my work in rhododendron has been involved with a lot of scanning electron microscope work and looking at the different kinds of scales, and glue and looking at electron micrographs just do not go together. It's much better, and so I have a very good relationship with the mounting staff who sew all my specimens in a much more laborious fashion, but nevertheless it means that one can examine the scale structure. This is just a few of the examples of the very different kinds of scales in rhododendrons. Now, bugs are a terrible problem. These are the two, the biscuit beetle and the Stockholm beetle, are the two beetles which we have most problem with in our botanic garden. Despite all our precautions, we still have outbreaks of the pest, and unfortunately we can't now, with modern health and safety, we can't treat with bromide the way we used to fumigate the whole herbarium, and so we have to freeze things. And it's amazing how the old techniques, excuse me, which worked extremely well when I was working in the Bogor herbarium, everything certainly in the Dutch days and soon after independence, all their specimens were absolutely sprayed heavily with mercuric chloride, and those old mercuric chloride specimens survived incredibly well. When they stopped using mercuric chloride, the bugs increased absolutely exponentially. In the Natural History Museum in London, they used to use powder-chlorobenzene, better known to a lot of people as mothballs, and you used to go in there and work away in the wonderful smell of mothballs. And you come out smelling of mothballs afterwards. This is now a banned substance. It's supposed to be carcinogenic. One or two of us seem to have survived remarkably well. But nevertheless, again, that was extremely effective, but can't be used anymore. So we have to rely on freezing specimens now. We freeze about minus 36 degrees centigrade. All incoming specimens are frozen for 5 days minimum before they go into the herbarium. And a very interesting concept. One of the things that I hope that comes up in my talk many times is the importance of education. And you can see the specimen down in the corner. It's a composite specimen, and it's covered with what we call frass, the deposit that these herbarium beetles deposit all round. Now, what we found with our cleaners were they are very efficient people and they clean. And so in order to identify where bugs are working, one needs to see frass, one needs to see the dirt that they're producing. And it was realised that the cleaners were cleaning it up so that we couldn't readily identify it. And a very simple procedure was to actually train our cleaners to identify frass and not to clean it up, but to draw it to the curator's attention. Very simple, but it's had a very dramatic effect on identifying infestations as they come about. We excuse me, keep the specimens, the carpological specimens, are all kept in individual polythene bags or airtight boxes. Getting bugs into thick fruiting specimens can be a real problem, and it can be a real source of infestation. And so individualizing these things and trying to check on them at regular intervals is quite important. We have also a spirit collection. The spirit collection, of course, is immune from the bugs. The two groups that, in my experience, and I think in the experience of curators since, we've had worst effect with is the umbelliferae, as an old-fashioned person I call them, or the apiaceae, always tending to have outbreaks, and the mycological, the fungal specimens. They've been the two groups which we've repeatedly had problems with specimens. Now, we were extremely we were extremely lucky to get a large grant from the Mellon Foundation in the United States to start scanning specimens. As I say, the use of our specimens has changed enormously, and the scanning of specimens eventually, hopefully, reduces the amount of damage, certainly from posting specimens to and from to herbaria all over the world. We now have imaged, I think, all our type specimens and are busy to image selected areas of the 2 to 3 million specimens that we hold in the Edinburgh Herbarium. Now, we got the Mellon Foundation provided us with funding for part-time staff and for the digital scanners. The digital scanners are now used largely for illustrations. They're very slow. They will only do about 50 specimens a day, whereas the photo scanners which have come in, and we put in photo scanners, they do about 500 specimens a day and are much easier to work with. We now barcode all our specimens, and this gives them a unique number and a linkage to, if there's a spirit collection, a carpological collection, or even a living collection, and to our general database. And the barcoding has come in, and we now barcode all the incoming specimens. We barcoded again all the type specimens, and we're busy barcoding as fast as we can. It's quite interesting that I remember still when barcodes were first introduced, and they came in a TV program, Tomorrow's World, and the barcoding system was showing off, and it hiccuped, and they never got through, and one of the commentators said, "Oh, this will never catch on." And now, I don't know, all our supermarkets do everything with barcoding. I'm sure most of your supermarkets do things with barcoding, and barcoding is certainly here to stay in herbaria. Now, education, as I say, education is something that never stops, and it never stops. We educate from primary school children to PhD students, and with all sorts of different people coming into the herbarium. One is always trying to educate people the best way to do specimens. And we have these posters around the herbaria to encourage people how what is good practice and what is bad practice for herbarium specimens. Keeping them flat, keeping these packets at the corners, having them well labelled with archival ink or typed or computer generated. And this is, as I say, an ongoing process. We end up, ideally, with a beautifully dried specimen, such as this type specimen of the Mechanopsis. The colours well preserved, and this is a good indication that the DNA will also be well preserved. And I've said keeping the humidity and temperature as even as possible is very important to help prevent DNA degradation. Again, more of the posters that we have in the herbarium, what makes a good herbarium specimen, what makes a bad herbarium specimen. And what we also have to remember, as I say, we were set up primarily as a botanic garden. The herbarium came, I won't say a poor second, it's really become, the scientific work of the garden has become more important in the garden. But the garden is, in a way, our shop window. It's where we get the ordinary people of Edinburgh come in, and they like to come in with their families. It's a great place because no dogs are allowed, and so they can allow their children to run about on the grass in a way that is not always so easy in other parks. And we grow the plants both for aesthetic and scientific purposes. This is a view of our rock garden. We produce really a quite enormous, I think it's the largest catalogue of plants that any Botanic Gardens produces. It has about 40,000 entries now. The last one was produced in 2012. I think they're waiting until we reach the celebration of 350 years, which is only, I think, a very few years away to produce the next catalogue. We try to display plants from the whole of the world. And from this is where, of course, the Philippines is important, as already been mentioned this morning. It's one of the hot spots of biodiversity. Scotland in particular, and Britain in general, we have an absolutely desperately poor flora because we were covered in ice only 10,000 years ago. Everything pretty much was extinguished, and we had extremely few endemic species. Whereas you're so lucky in the Philippines, you've had inputs of plants from at least 3 different directions and remarkably rich endemic flora. So we do in the greenhouses, which are very expensive to maintain, we try and grow things from all around the world. This was one of the things which was a tremendous attraction, found for the second time last year. It's the big Sumatran arum. And I took the picture of the fruit down in the corner. We pollinated it from pollen, which was donated from other botanic gardens. So it was cross-pollinated. It is considered an endangered plant in the wild. So the botanic gardens collaborate with each other in maintaining these things and maintaining the variability of the DNA. And we produce these excellent fruits. And they were saying with the botanic garden that I understand De La Salle University are trying to set up, I hope that we can send them some fruits of this very spectacular plant. It's the sort of thing it came with enormous press coverage. And so we got a lot of new members and a lot of publicity when this plant flowered. Now I'll quickly run through. I've been to the Philippines on many occasions. Climbing Cleopatra Needle was one very memorable occasion, and we got a very dramatic endemic species of rhododendron. It was collected, completely sterile. There were no flowers at all when we collected it. We were allowed to take living material back on that occasion. We grew it in the Botanic Gardens, and I was astonished because it was one of those things that when it first flowered, one knew immediately that it was completely different from anything else. We've described several endemic species from Cleopatra Needle, and I like to think that this has encouraged the fact that it's now a conservation area, that this information has added to conservation value. We do a similar thing with, we have what to us is a very rare species, Laguna on our old mountain, which sits in Edinburgh. That's a city in the background. And we take seed from this, and we carefully nurture this for ex situ cultivation. Now, I don't need to lecture you really about the devastation that's caused around the world. This was a picture I took in the left-hand corner of the logging in Indonesia. Down south is the Fitzroy forest in Chile, absolutely devastated. And a picture I took from Mount Pulag, which shows really the fact that Mount Pulag is an absolutely isolated area of mossy forest. Everything else, as far as one can see, is devastation. This, in fact, was worsened by the fact that I went up just after there'd been a major earthquake, and so all those white slips are landslides. And the endemic rhododendron taxophonium, which occurs on Mount Pulag and nowhere else, it's been discovered, and as I say, is unlikely to be discovered anywhere else. And again, I like to think that this is a flagship species for the Philippines. It always causes wonderful comment. People are used to the Chinese rhododendrons with big broad leaves in Edinburgh. They come and see this with its narrow pine-like leaves and say that can't possibly be a rhododendron, so one has to argue with them. Education, as I say, we take at all levels, and we bring school parties into the herbarium, show them specimens, and we also do all sorts of things. And the two upper specimens showing parties in the Botanic Garden and down below in the Edinburgh Botanic Garden, with school children coming in, getting their first taste of an interest in plants, hopefully. As I say, once again, thank you very much for inviting me to your conference. I hope that rather rambling account has given some idea of what we do in Edinburgh, and maybe given you one or two ideas, but I'm sure with this splendid new museum in Manila, you'll be doing things even better than we do them. Thank you.